Hey guys, it's Jake here with Etrailer. Today we have a 2020 Ram 3500 cab and chassis, and we're going to be taking a look at, and I'm going to show you how to install the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs. Air helper springs are going to be a suspension enhancement item that are designed to mount between the top of your leaf pack and then the side of your frame. Typically they'll mount under the frame. This one's a bracket will bolt to the side of the frame and use that to push up against. There's a couple of different options for the Ram 3500 cab and chassis. This one I think is going to be the best option because of the heavy duty loads these are designed to haul. You can see the bed that we have loaded on here. This is a very, very heavy setup, and the owner of it has noticed that even with no load and hauling no trailer, that his springs are already taking a toll, his leaf springs. The airbags, what they're designed to do is they're designed to help you get more support in the rear end of your truck. Now they are by no means designed to take that load 100%. You still want a little bit of flex in your leaf springs on your truck so that you still have a comfortable ride, but these will allow you to adjust the air pressure to get that ride that you want. These air helper springs are going to have a max carrying capacity of 4,800 pounds. That is the load that they are designed to carry. It is not going to change the carrying capacity of your truck. They are just there to help carry some of the weight so that your vehicle doesn't have to carry it all. Again, when you're loading up a trailer or you're loading up the back of your truck, you want a little bit of sag in the back. You don't want it to bury it like it probably has been if you're looking at these airbags, but you definitely don't want it to be higher than factory ride height or even at factory ride height. Usually about an inch to an inch and a half drop from factory ride height is just about right. The max PSI rating on these are going to be 100 PSI. Now, I can tell you from having airbags, 100 PSI in these bags is going to be incredibly stiff. We've got 50 PSI in them right now, which is going to be half of the capacity. And it feels pretty good hauling this trailer empty. I would say if we loaded up something like a skid loader or maybe a tractor on here, we'd have to bump it up to about 75 to 80. But bumping it up to 100 PSI is going to be very, very stiff on those bags. So you just want to be careful of how much you're putting in. And don't be afraid to let a little bit of air out too. Kind of test the water, see what you like for certain trailers and certain loads. That is the whole purpose of these airbags, is so that you can really dial it in for whatever you're carrying. I will say with this set of airbags, you're going to want to leave 5 PSI in the bags at all times so that the bags will have some integrity to them. If you let all the air out, the bags will have the tendency to fold over each other, and that will damage the rubber. So you want to leave 5 in there so that even if you're driving around empty, you want that little bit of air in there to keep that bag blown up. Now, one other thing I will recommend is going to be an onboard air compressor. Having this as a benefit that you can add and subtract air into these airbags is only as good as being able to do it a little bit easier. So adding an onboard compressor is night and day difference. I started with just airbags and no compressor, and then I added a compressor. The thing I noticed is that if you're hauling a trailer, even like this trailer, and you're going to pick up a piece of equipment, you've got to decide how much air you want in there on your way home, not on your way there. So it's kind of a game you always have to play. You either have to drive there with it super stiff all the time, or you have to drive home with it with not enough air if you drove there with less air in it. So having that onboard compressor is really going to help you to dial in that air. My favorite thing about that is that if I pulled up to a stoplight and I felt like it was riding a little rough, or I didn't have enough air in it, I could hit my remote, bump up the air about 10-15 PSI, drop some air out if I needed to, and it would do it very, very quickly, enough for that light to turn green, and then I was riding back down the road. And you can kind of play with it, but you can do it on the fly. When it comes to the installation, this is a very involved installation. You have to drill 4 holes in your frame rails on each side, so 8 total. And then you're going to have to bring some hardware onto the inside of the frame rail to hold it on the back side of the bolts so that you can get it threaded on and then torque them all down. That is probably the most difficult part about it. I would say even drilling the holes was easier than running this hardware into place on the side plate that goes onto your frame rail. The benefit that you have is that we were not able to use our lifts in order to do this installation, so I did it from the ground by just putting some jack stands underneath our axle. We lifted it up, put some jack stands under there, took our wheels and tires off, and I'm going to show you exactly how you would have to do it at home. To begin our installation, we're going to remove our wheels and tires from our vehicle. This particular kit, what we typically do is we'll lift the vehicle up in the air, and that helps to get a little bit better access underneath. But with this being a dually, there is hardly any room to work under there with the wheels and tires in the way, so we got to take them off. This is also going to be probably the way you're going to be able to do it at home the easiest. Now I just like to clean off the frame rail of any dirt or debris that we have. That way our bracket will sit flat against it, and so that we can see the marks where we're going to have to drill. Now we're going to take our bottom bracket. It's going to look like this. We'll set it up on top of our spring perch. And what we're going to do here, because we've got some different bracketry welded underneath here for the top of our bed, which you very well could have that too, we're going to leave all of this hardware loose under here so that we can move it forward and backwards wherever it's going to fit best. But we'll take one of the larger spacers. You'll have these brackets. You'll have a smaller set of brackets too. The larger one is going to go under the front, and you can probably see why. It's going to level that bracket out. And we'll take our big carriage bolts and slide those down through the holes. Then we can take the small brackets with the elongated hole facing the outside. The reason they give you an elongated option is because there's actually two holes on this one side and only one on the other. So you just match those up, and we'll follow it with the nuts that go on them. Now this front side may give you a little bit of trouble because these bolts just barely seat through there. But I found if you give it a little bit of a bump back towards the U-bolts for our spring pack, it'll give you a little bit more room to get that hardware on. Now we can take our upper bracket, and we essentially want this to be, this big open hole here, to be directly in line with our center hole on the top of our lower bracket. So we'll lift it up, and what we want to have here is we want between 5 and 6.5 inches between the top of this plate and the bottom of this plate. So we've got it about 5 3/4, and that's what we're going to go with. And essentially what we've done here is we're at the bottom of our frame here and the bottom of our frame there. We can check the other side just to be sure. Yep, we're about 5.5 there. So that'll be good. That's enough space for us to be able to slide our airbag in. We're going to take our marker and mark out these holes. Now what we need to do is drill out our 4 holes in our frame rail. I'm going to use this center punch, put a mark in the center of each one of those. In the top elongated holes, I like to make a mark in the center of it so that either way you have a little bit of adjustment up and down if you need to adjust for the bottom holes. But we're just going to work up using drill bits, start with the small size we have. You probably don't want to go much smaller than an 1/8 inch because this frame is hard. You may snap smaller drill bits off. But we're going to work up to 7/16. And before we puncture through the frame, it's not a bad idea to just reach back there and make sure there's no wiring. I already checked, there's a little bit of wiring here, but it goes under where we're going to be drilling. Because of where we had to mount the bracket a little bit further back because of our bed bracket, there was a second bracket behind here that we had to drill through too. So if it's a little bit more difficult, just take your time and be careful. Take our airbag, set it up in place. We're just going to use it as a device to hold our top bracket in place while we put some hardware in. We'll take our hex bolts that come in our kit with the smaller washers. Slide those through. And this part is going to require 2 people. What you'll do is you'll have one person on the other side tightening down the nuts and another person on this side holding down this hardware, making sure it doesn't move. Take the large washers that come in our kit, slide them over our hardware that's sticking through our frame, then thread on our nuts. We'll do the same for the remaining 3. Now, if you did it like we did and you had to end up moving your bracket back a little bit, this exhaust hanger bracket might get in your way. So just be patient and get your hardware started on there. Now we can come back underneath and tighten down our nuts that are on the bottom of our large bolts. Now we're going to take our air fitting, put it in the top of our airbag, and we want to tighten it down till no more of this thread locker, that white thread locker, is showing. Now when we lift this up into place, if you've got an onboard air compressor, I recommend turning the air inlet facing the front of the vehicle, but if you don't, you're just doing a manual fill like we are doing today, you'll want this facing the back of the truck. You also want to take a picture of this yellow sticker. That is going to be your torque specs for all your hardware. Set that down, squeeze the bag, slide it in, make sure our air fitting can still swivel with no problems. Then we can take our short hex bolt and thread it into the bottom of our bag. On the top of our bag, we're going to have those 2 bolts you can see there. We're going to take 2 more of our nuts and thread those on top. And we'll tighten them down. Now we want to come back and torque all of our hardware down to the specifications that is on that label on top of our airbag. When you're tightening down these big long bolts, you want to go back and forth on either one to make sure that you're putting even pressure on them. Now what you need to do is you'll need to repeat that same process on the driver's side of the vehicle. Again, taking the wheels and tires off is going to be the easiest way to do it. The one thing on the driver's side that is a little bit trickier is that all the brake lines are run inside that C-channel frame on the driver's side. So you just have to be really careful when you're drilling your holes. I used a couple little backing plates. You can use some chunks of wood, put it back there behind there, so if you drill through the frame, you're going to hit that wood and not the lines. Once you get both of them installed, we've got our driver and our passenger side all installed. We'll take our airline. This is going to come in one big loop. We just cut it in half. We're going to start at our airbag, connect it up, and then run it to the back of the vehicle. Now when you're running your airline, we just started at the airbag. Make your connection. You want to make sure that your airline is cut straight. You don't want any kinks or the airline to be cut at an angle. Insert it in the top of the airbag, run it back. On this cabin chassis, it was pretty easy because there's nothing to get in the way. The exhaust is not really in the way. And you want to come back here, and then the bed that we have on this truck, they're not using their license plate holder back here, so we just used the 2 holes on the bottom from either side, came back, and then used the 2 nuts that are included in the kit to fasten those Schrader valves to the back here. Now, another way that you can mount it, if you've got a different style bed on here, is that the kit's going to come with this bracket to be able to mount it to a square surface. If you want to mount it up to the back of your bumper, or if you have a square tube back here that you can mount it to. But I highly recommend, even if you do have a license plate back here, just drill them out a little bit larger than the factory or than the license plate comes with, and those should slip right through. Now before we put our wheels and tires back on, we're going to air our airbags up to about 70 psi on both sides to make sure that the connection back here is not leaking and the one on top of our airbag is not leaking. Now we discovered a pretty big leak on our driver's side, and you can see that when I was pushing it in place, I barely had it on there. So we'll give it a fresh cut here Again, making sure that's nice and straight. There we go. And this tubing can kind of be a pain to deal with because it's very stiff. So what we're going to do is push this back into place. I got a little bit extra back there. There we go. I just felt it pop. So that should be a good strong bite in there, and we'll test that again. Make sure we don't see any bubbles forming. Looks like our connection is all good there. Now that we've fixed that one leak in our airbag, that's going to do it for the installation. All we have to do is put our wheels and tires back on and get them torqued down. Well guys, hopefully this video helped you decide whether the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs are right for you in your 2020 Ram 3500.